Glad to know you're still with us. The Central Bank of Nigeria has raised the monetary policy rate MPR from 13 to 14%. The CBN Governor Godwin Emefiele announced this on Tuesday during the 286th meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee held in Lagos. According to him, it was the right option considering economic realities. The committee resolved that the most rational policy option would be to further strengthen its tightening stance in order to effectively curtail the unabated rising trend of inflation. And now we evaluate the rationale behind this raise and its impact on the economy. Joining us for further analysis is Dr. Muda Yusuf, the CEO, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, CCPE. He joins us via the telephone. Good to have you join us, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
All right. Now, the Central Bank of Nigeria has unanimously voted to raise the MPR from 13% to 14%. Now, this makes it a second hawkish move by the bank in the year 2022. How did this come to you?
Well, it didn't come to me as a surprise, given the intense inflationary pressure that we are going through. And this is not peculiar only to Nigeria. We have inflationary or challenges of inflation across the world because of the problems of Ukraine, energy prices, and the rest of them. So it's not peculiar, but whether it is desirable or not, I think is a different matter. Because each country has its own peculiarities. The factors driving inflation in Nigeria is different from factors driving inflation in many of the advanced economies. Because the CBN has taken this step because of the inflationary trend. Inflation has gone up to 18.6% in June. And if you look at the basket of goods that are consumed by the ordinary Nigerians, we're talking of inflation of well over 50% in reality. So the situation is really very bad. But whether it is the monetary policy instrument that can tackle inflation, it's a completely different matter. Because we had a hike in MPR 2 months ago by 150 basis points. Between then and now, rather than abating, inflation had even further increased. So it's actually something that you need to interrogate. Whether adjusting MPR or hiking interest rates in our own environment can actually tame inflation. I don't think that is the case. I think because inflation is essentially a supply side problem here in Nigeria, I think the thing to do is to be looking more in the direction of the factors affecting the supply side of the economy so that you can deal with the challenges of output, you can deal with the challenges of productivity and all of that. That for me should be the higher priority. Because the hiking rate now is going to push up the cost of fund for manufacturers, for other investors in other sectors of the economy. And it's not going to solve the problem of inflation. So what exactly are we going to gain?
All right, so what
can't just be hiking rates because other countries are hiking rates.
I was actually coming to that.
Peculiarities.
I was coming to that, and it's a good thing you have already talked about the fact that we have our own peculiarity. Can we expatiate on this particular peculiarity and how the peculiarity should be addressed? Because analysts just like you have also talked about the fact that we're just doing what every other economy is doing, forgetting that we have our own peculiarity, which you have also talked about the fact that our own inflation is from the supply side and all of that. Help us understand these peculiarities and how CBN, or let's say the government, should be addressing this issue.
Well, the peculiarities, one, is the fact that the energy cost has gone up and the impact is much more severe because we have a peculiar problem with the power situation. So all those who are in factories, industries and all of that, who normally should be dependent on public power supply and dependent on generators. These generators are running on diesel. Diesel has gone up by over 300%. So that is pushing up the cost of production. is pushing up the operating costs of businesses across all sectors. That is number one. Secondly, we don't have a rail system as we have in many other parts of the world. The main means of distribution, of haulage, of freight in this country is by road. Almost 90% or more of our distribution channels are by road. And these trucks that move these items by road, these products by road, are running on diesel. Diesel is now over 800 naira per liter from about 200 a year ago. So that is also fueling inflation. Then we have the problem of the exchange rate depreciation. Now the exchange rate in parallel market is now around 620 naira to the dollar. How much was it a year ago? Possibly around maybe 500 or even less than that, maybe 400. Now we are talking of 620. Look at the impact of that on inflation. That is also a peculiarity. I mean, we have a sharp depreciation in the currency. Then we have the problem of acute shortage of foreign exchange. So the foreign exchange problem, we have a double jeopardy there. We have the problem of the depreciation. We have the problem of scarcity of foreign exchange. Many manufacturers can't source their inputs for production. They can't get intermediate products for production. So that is affecting the supply side. Then there is the issue of insecurity. Insecurity is also a peculiarity. Now, the agricultural sector has been ravaged by a problem of insecurity. Many of the farmers cannot go to the farms. That is also fueling food inflation. Food inflation is even more higher than the headline inflation. It's over 20%. So that is another peculiarity. Then the CBS funding of deficits is also a peculiarity. I mean, by current estimates, it's between maybe 15 to around 18 trillion naira cumulatively that the CBN has spent to fund the deficit of government. That is also highly inflationary. Then you have structural problems of power, of transportation, of the ports, and all of that. So the point I'm making is that rather than concentrate on this issue of MPR and the rest of them, we should be addressing these fundamental issues, which are having much more effect of fueling inflation. Those are the key drivers of inflation. So those are the peculiarities. Because the more you hike the rates, it just puts unavoidable pressure on entrepreneurs that are already indebted to the banks. I can tell you, between yesterday and now, many of these, those who are indebted to the bank will have been receiving new notices, revising the terms of their credit. Already prime lending rate is around 19% or so. The lending rate that is not prime is well over 20% already. So if you now have this hike, prime lending rate to be climbing even beyond 20%. The lending rate to other sectors to other borrowers that are not prime will be getting to around 25%. So how do you cope with that? Already, these businesses are grappling with problem of diesel, problem of wood purchasing power, all sorts of problems in the economy. So this is not the time to add the burden of higher interest rates on them, especially when that high interest rate is not solving the problem of inflation.
All right, let me come in now. You still want to say something?
I said those are the key issues that we should be addressing. Let me talk about tackling inflation. And the fiscal authority should also bring something to the table.
Okay, I was coming there. I think you should just continue.
Solve everything. We need the fiscal authorities to bring things to the table around trade policy, around tariff policy, around tax policy, so that you can moderate some of this cost. Those are the things that should happen.
Now, speaking of fiscal policies, you just mentioned some things in passing. I would like you to dwell on them to help us better understand what that should bring to the table.
Now, when we talk about fiscal policy, there are two major components of fiscal policy. There is trade policy there is tax policy. Trade policy has to do with the tariff policy, the policy around import and exports. When you are dealing with a situation of high prices, especially that is driven by supply side factors, you begin to look at the tariff, import tariff, on some of these sectors. What is the import tariff on raw materials for manufacturers? What is the import tariff for their equipment and machineries? What is the import tariff for hospitals, equipment, for drugs and things like that? So we should begin to look at all of that. Where the import tariffs are high, and in many cases, they are very high, we can begin to review those things downwards, so that the cost of production can begin to go. Then you cannot handle the cost of energy. At least you can begin to deal with the cost of raw materials by reducing the import tariff on some of these things. Even the energy products that we import diesel, we import PMS, we import aviation fuel and all of that. What is the tariff on those things? At a time like this, you remove the tariff on all of those things. It's not going to have any serious dent on our revenue, but will impact positively on the private sector and on the investors, so that they can have some headroom, they can have some breathing space to be able to deliver products and outputs at a much cheaper cost or cheaper price to the consumers. So that is what I mean by fiscal policy intervention. All along, we are not hearing any fiscal policy response to say that, okay, in this sector, we are reducing tariffs by so amount. In this sector, we are giving so tax concession.
And why is that so, if I may come in? Why is that so? Because the analysts have been complaining about this also. It depends
on the understanding of those who are governing the country or those who are managing the economy. All along is the CBN we see running all over the place. The CBN cannot do everything. Some of the things they do, they also do, the interventions are not even so appropriate. So there are things that monetary policy can do. There are things that the fiscal policy can do.
Now, on whose table does that responsibility rest?
Calling on the fiscal authorities to step up.
When we say fiscal authority, some Nigerians want to understand what ministry are we talking about? Are we talking about what department are we talking about? So, in clear terms, on whose table does that lie?
It lies largely on finance ministry, because most of the fiscal policy measures come from finance. It's finance that has powers over tariff. It's finance that they have a lot of influence on even tax matters, because FRS is under them. The customs is under the Ministry of Finance. So all of these things revolve around finance. But more importantly, it's around the government itself. Because we are talking of investing in transportation to bring down the cost. It doesn't belong just to finance. That is in the Ministry of Works. That is within the domain of the government, because you have ministries that have direct impact on the economy. We have Ministry of Agri, we have Ministry of Works, we have Ministry of Transportation, we have Ministry of Trade and Investment, we have the Investment Promotion Commission, we have the Nigerian Export Promotion Council. You know, we have all of these agencies. All of them together impact on the fiscal policy of government. But the major driver in this space is the Ministry of Finance. But these policy issues have to cascade down from the presidency. The presidency has an economic advisor. That's the National Economic Council. So we have all sorts of agencies that can bring something to the table to cushion the effect of this inflation. So that don't leave everything to the CBN, so that the CBN will now be finding itself under pressure to be imposing unnecessary pressure on those who are borrowing money from the banks. Because interest rates, increasing interest rate cannot solve this problem. It can only compound the problem of those who are investors in the economy.
All right, let's get back to what the CBN governor talked about. And then on the one hand, he was talking about the fact that members of the MPC were conscious of the fact that output growth remained fragile. And then on the other hand, they felt that not curtailing inflation now could erode the monetary gains achieved in improving consumer purchasing power. And that would, of course, worsen the poverty level of the vulnerable populace. Help us understand this, because on the one hand, you are conscious of the fact that, output growth is fragile, and on the other hand, you still feel that increasing these rates would help us achieve something. What exactly is this about?
What that is about is an expression of the dilemma that the CBN often faces when it comes to issue of monetary policy interventions. Because most of these policy measures, they have costs, they have benefits. That's the point that the CBN governor was making. The cost of hiking rates is that it may adversely affect growth because it's going to hurt investment. As I told you, interest rate is already high enough. Investors are already facing enough trouble already because of issues of FX, Forex, and the issue of energy cost. So when you add to that an increase in the cost of credit, that may have adverse effect on growth and output. That is what he was referring to as having an adverse effect on output growth. Now, as to whether we need to the hiking rate, I think the whole idea is that it doesn't want to be seen as not doing anything. I'm talking of the CBN. The CBN doesn't want to be seen as not doing anything, especially when you look at what is happening around the world, in US, in UK, in all the countries in Europe, some countries in Asia, even in Africa. Everybody is hiking rates. But you cannot say because everybody is raising rates, you also have to raise rates just for the sake of raising rates. You need to examine whether your hiking rate has any impact.
Let me come in here, Doctor. Let me come in here, Doctor.
To answer your question, it's about trying to frame the dilemma that the CBN faces in deciding whether increase rates or hold rates or losing the rates. That is what the CBN was trying to say.
All right, thank you for that. Well, the CBN governor, remember even when the MPR rate was hiked in May, he talked about the fact that the development financing policy could help cushion the effect, and that is also being reiterated at this point in time. How effective is that really in addressing, or probably just reducing the effect of this hike, the development financing policy of the CBN?
Well, the CBN has been doing a lot. We must acknowledge that. I must commend the CBN for that. In the area of development finance, many of the manufacturers and some SMEs as well have benefited from the finance or development finance. Many times they get single-digit interest rates, which normally they will not get from the commercial banks. They also get facilities that are long-tenured. Sometimes credit facility of a tenure of about up to 7 years, 5 years. You can't get that easily from any commercial bank. So that intervention is a very good thing, and it has a lot of impact. But what proportion of the economic players are benefiting from this intervention? They are a very small minority. That is the problem. There is a very small minority because sometimes the conditions are so tough that many people cannot meet the conditions. So the few that are meeting the conditions, most of them in the medium to large segments of economic players, most of the SMEs cannot meet those conditions. Because most times, what the banks will require for you to access this intervention fund is bank guarantee. How many businesses can provide bank guarantees to the banks to be able to get this facility? So that is the issue. The development finance is good, but it's not a substitute for having an economy-wide low interest rate regime. It's not a substitute, but you must acknowledge that it has its positive impacts. And there are also arguments in some quarters that for some of those intervention funds, the quality of those interventions may need to be interrogated, particularly all these anchor borrowers and so on, because the default rates are so high, sometimes as high as 70% or more. People are not paying back. So that raises a question as to the sustainability of that model of intervention in terms of financing. But it has its benefits for those who are beneficiaries of it. So that is the point that the CBN was making when he was talking about the development finance. I mean, the CBN governor ruled out so many amounts running to trillions that have been disbursed. But how many of those funds have come back by way of repayment? You know, that is the question.
All right, thank you.
That does not diminish the point that it has impacted positively on a few beneficiaries.
All right, thank you so much, Doctor. I think that's a very good place to leave it. Thanks so much for the thoughts you have shared with us today.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
All right, we've been speaking with Dr. Muda Yusuf, the CEO of CCPE. Well, we'll take a break now, and when we come back, NNPC officially changes name from a wholly state-run entity to commercial firm, as President Muhammadu Buhari says entity will deliver value to 200 million shareholders. That's our next talking point in a moment. Please stay with us.